Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince and Other Writings. We're in chapter 13, which is titled On Auxiliary, Mixed, and Citizen Soldiers. Let's begin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Auxiliary troops, which are the other kind of useless armies, are those of a power whom you have asked to come and defend you with his troops, as was done in recent times by Julius, who, having seen the sad test of his mercenary forces in the Ferrara campaign, turned to auxiliaries and arranged with Ferdinand, King of Spain, to help him with men in arms. Okay, so auxiliary troops are basically sounds like your allies' troops. These troops can be useful and good in themselves, but they are almost always harmful for the man who calls them in. For if they lose, you are undone. If they win, you remain their prisoner. Ooh, that's a good point. So it's like, you invite them in, you lose, you're undone, you didn't win. Which makes sense, because if you lose, it sucks either way. However, the caveat here is, if they win, well, it's like you owe them in a way, right? I find that to be interesting. And although ancient history is full of such examples nonetheless, I do not want to go beyond this recent example of Pope Julius II. Okay, Pope Julius II, whose decision could not have been more ill-considered. For in wanting to take Ferrara, he put himself entirely in the hands of a foreigner. Okay, notice here. You want to win so badly that you put your fate in the hands of a foreigner. So the nationalists would be like, why are you allowing a foreign power to basically put you in such a precarious situation? But his good fortune produced a third factor, so that he did not gather the fruit of his bad decisions. For when his auxiliaries were beaten at Ravenna, beyond all his expectations, and those of others, the Swiss rose up and drove off the victors, so that he was not taken prisoner by the enemy who had fled, nor by his auxiliaries, since he had won with arms of other than theirs. So here, we're learning a lot about history which we didn't know. So the Swiss, the Ravenna, the Florentines, being totally unarmed, hired 10,000 Frenchmen to conquer Pisa, and because of this decision they brought more danger on themselves than they in any period of their troubles. Okay, key factor here. The Florentines were totally disarmed, so they had to hire people to protect them. So if you look at the Second Amendment in America, when the founding fathers really looked at militias being able to rise up and defend in case of an invasion and civil strife, you see the importance of that. If you are unarmed, you have to hire people, and then what? You have to trust that they're going to not turn on you. The Emperor of Constantinople, in order to oppose his neighbors, brought 10,000 Turks into Greece, who, when the war was over, did not want to go away. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Okay, so look, the Emperor of Constantinople, he's like, hey, Turks, come here to Greece, fight for me. And then when the war was over, they didn't want to go away, which was the beginning of the servitude of Greece to the infidels. Oh, well, would you look at that? So he's given us several examples already here. So Pope Julius II, he put him, when he wanted to take Ferrara, he put himself in the hands of a foreigner. The Florentines, when they wanted to conquer Pisa, they needed the Frenchmen. And then we see he gave another example of the Emperor of Constantinople bringing in the Turks. And then, well, everything changed for them in Greece. Anyone, therefore, who does not want to conquer should avail himself of these forces, because they are much more dangerous than mercenaries. Okay, so they are much more dangerous than mercenaries. So auxiliaries. For with them the defeat is assured, since they are all united, all obedient to others. Whereas with mercenaries, once they have won, they still need time and a good opportunity in order to injure you, since they are not a unified group and have been hired and paid by you, and with them a third party with whom you made their leader cannot quickly acquire enough authority to harm you. Okay. Interesting. So we have mercenaries and auxiliaries. Mercenaries, it appears they need more time, whereas your ally, they came to defend you, they're already united, and it almost gets like one does it for coin, one does it because they were ordered to. So the one who fights for coin is a lot different, seems as what he's trying to get at. A wise prince. Oh wait, here we go. To sum up, with mercenaries, their inaction is more dangerous. With auxiliaries, it is their prowess, virtue. Well, would you look at that? So, if a mercenary doesn't want to fight for you because you ain't paying them enough, you're in trouble. But if auxiliaries are so good and they win your battle for you, now they can possess you because you're weak and you needed them. A wise prince, therefore, has always avoided these soldiers, and has had recourse to his own, and has chosen rather to lose with his own men than to win with those of others, not judging that to be a true victory, which is gained by outside arms. That's a fascinating way to look at it. So, a prince, a ruler, a great leader, you want to be smart, you fight with your own men, rather than hiring mercenaries and asking for auxiliary forces. Because if you're always propped up by outside forces, you're really weak and you shouldn't really rule then. It's almost like the one who has the most loyal, dedicated men is going to win, is what it sounds like. Shall never hesitate to cite the example of Cesar Borgia and his actions. This duke entered the Romagna with auxiliary troops, leading an army composed entirely of Frenchmen, and with those he took Imola and Forli. But as soon as arms did not then seem reliable to him, he turned to mercenaries, judging them to be less dangerous, and hired the Orsini and Vitelli. So the Orsini and the Vitelli. When, in using them, he found them to be undependable, unfaithful, and dangerous, he got rid of them and turned to his own men. And it is easy to see the difference between these two sorts of armies, if one considers the difference in the reputation of the Duke when he had only the French and when he had the Orsini and Vitelli, and then when he was left with his own soldiers and relied only on himself, his reputation always increased. Nor was he ever esteemed so highly as when everyone saw that he was the complete master of his army. Okay. The complete master of his army. Now this is very cool because it's like you're getting into the political finesse of warship, right? Of how you're going to conduct your military affairs. So, if you are depending on your mercenaries, you can see like, these are hired paid people. And then if you look at someone who uses soldiers of another nation, you're like, they're not very united. But if you have a leader who's like, they obey him, they love him, it's stronger. I'm thinking of Alexander the Great as a perfect example. I'm thinking of Genghis Khan. I'm thinking of Gaius Julius Caesar in the Gallic Wars, right? Because with those leaders, they're always spoken of with the little information that remains due to war and pestilence and burning of libraries, we see that they were very loved and that they had mastership of their armies, suffering with their men and whatnot. Now, today, does any president have that kind of master of their army? Or are they just throwing the uniform on anything and everything and letting the CIA create groups abroad and, regime change, coups and all this? The things back here seemed way more clear cut, when today there's just different types of warfare, especially with bots, shadow banning. Social media is definitely a weapon of war, and the people who own the code of the algorithm, they can really make things appear and disappear. So it's a new form of warfare, and Machiavelli is writing this, and it's a work of genius. In the future, I wonder what people will write about social media. And now with the emergence of AI, you can doctor, and editing. Like, I've seen people make, I had one video I did, it was like 2 hours long. I saw someone like cut down it to like an hour, and I'm like, but when you watch it, it's almost like a seamless edit, and you're like, how'd they do that? And there's been times where I talked to somebody for like an hour and 40 minutes, and they cut everything down to 40 minutes, and then they reshape it and cut out a lot of what I said in my own sentences, and they reframe it, and you're like, whoa, wow. If you watch it and you didn't, like, it's choppy because there's jump cut edits, and you're like, what's going on here? So imagine what they'll be able to do with like deep fakes of what leaders say and how that can lead to war and all that. So it might be harder today to have complete mastery over your army because of AI, deep fakes, and all that, and social media, right? But again, we can see clearly that it will always stand the person who has the most unified force with the most loyalty, who respect their leader, will do better. Those men will go down fighting, not lighting themselves on fire and being whiny little twats, but they'll actually try to succeed the mission and stuff like that. It's fascinating. Fascinating. I did not wish to depart from recent Italian examples, but I cannot leave out Heron of Syracuse, since he is one of those I have previously mentioned. This man, having been made, as I said, head of the armies of Syracusans, immediately recognized that mercenary forces were useless. So mercenary forces were useless because they were composed of condottieri, like our Italian ones, and because he thought he could neither keep them nor let them go, he had them all cut into pieces, and from then on he made war with his own arms, not those of others. Wow, okay, so Hieron of Syracuse, Syracuse. I need to read a biography on this guy. So he hired mercenaries, it appears. And he realized, you know what, I can't keep them because they could turn on me. They rival me. If I let them go, they could be a problem. So cut them into pieces. Ruthlessness. Wow. History is wild. I also want to call to mind an exemplary figure from the Old Testament that fits this argument. When David offered to Saul to go and fight Goliath, the Philistine challenger Saul, in order to give him courage, armed him with his own arms, which David, when he had tried them on, refused, saying that with them he could not demonstrate his real worth. And for that reason he wanted to meet the enemy with his own sling and his own knife. Look at that. You want to meet the enemy with your own weapons. In short, the arms of others either slip off your back or weigh you down or tie you up. Charles VII, father of King Louis XI, having by means of his good fortune and ability and virtue liberated France from the English, recognized this necessity of arming oneself with one's own arms, and established in his kingdom an ordinance for training cavalry and infantry. Afterward, King Louis, his son, abolished the one concerning the infantry and began to hire the Swiss, which error, followed by others, is, as can now be seen in fact, the cause of the dangers of the kingdom faces. So here, he's laid out a lot of examples in history for when auxiliaries and mercenaries didn't benefit people in the way that they thought, and how he gave a biblical example as well, just about your own arms. So, your own weapons, your own soldiers. He's making it quite clear. By giving such prestige to the Swiss, he degraded all his own troops. For he got rid of the infantry and forced his cavalry to depend on the arms of others. For being accustomed to fighting the Swiss, they do not think they can win without them. So interesting. So it's like psychological warfare in a way as well. The morality of the troops. What does it feel like if someone knows that you need their troops so desperately? I wonder. The result is that the French are no match for the Swiss, and without the Swiss, they will not test themselves against others. The armies of France have thus been mixed, partially mercenary and partially her own citizens. Take together, they are much better than armies composed purely of mercenaries or auxiliaries, but much inferior to having one's own troops. So here we're getting at another thought project. Having your own troops, he contends, will always be superior. And then if you have to mix auxiliaries and mercenaries, that's still better than having too much reliance on mercenaries and auxiliaries. Fascinating. This almost sounds like the necessity for a draft, or the necessity for military training for every citizen, right? Because if you only want to call upon your own citizens, you need to have a sort of militaristic mindset built into the society. Reminds me of how the Prophet, peace be upon him, reminded people to train with arrows, and learning to ride horses, and Muslims are to have also a security mindset. We have the fear prayer, we have the book of jihad. So there's nothing wrong with that. And I remember the hadith where a polytheist asked the Prophet, peace be upon him, if he wanted aid or like for them to join. He mentioned, I'm summarizing, like, no, we don't need you. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, never asked the polytheists for military aid, and actually the Muslim monotheists fought the polytheists. So all the people united by Islam were under the leader of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and under worshipping Allah, right? They had their own troops, their own cause, and they didn't need to hire polytheistic mercenaries. And the example already given should suffice, for the kingdom of France would be unconquerable if the ordinances of Charles had been preserved or augmented. So clearly here, Machiavelli feels that if the ordinances were not removed and altered of Charles, it would have been much better for France. But because they are insufficiently prudent, men will start something, and because it then tastes good to them, the poison within is not perceived. As I said above, about consumptive fevers. Thus, he who does not recognize the ills in a principality when they arise does not have true wisdom, which is something given to few. And if the initial fall of the Roman Empire were analyzed, one will find it started with the hiring of the Goths and soldiers. Okay, look. fall of the Roman Empire, starting with the hiring of Goths as soldiers. Because from that, beginning forces of the Roman Empire began to weaken, and all that energy, virtue, which was taken from it was given to the Goths. I conclude, therefore, that no principality is secure without having its own armies. On the contrary, it is completely dependent on fortune, because it does not have the valor, virtue, which loyalty defends it in the midst of adversity. So valor. You need valor. You need your soldiers to have loyalty and valor in faces of intense adversity. And it was always the opinion and saying of wise men, quote, that there is nothing so weak and unstable as a reputation for power not based on one's own strength. So, that is a very astute observation. You can get a great reputation for power when it's based on your own strength, not on who you can hire and pay. Think about that. You can pay mercenaries, but that's not your own strength. So when you won that victory, it's not your own strength. When you win it yourself, there's more glory in that. And one's own troops are those that are composed of subjects, or citizens, or your own dependents. All others are either mercenaries or auxiliaries. Okay, he laid it out for us clearly. So our subjects, citizens, dependents. Everything else is mercenaries or auxiliaries. And it will be easy to find the method for organizing one's own troops if one will consider the methods of the four men I cited above, and if one notes how Philip, the father of Alexander the Great, and how many republics and princes have been armed and organized, to those methods I differ absolutely. So clearly, we can see he's wise in what he says. And in another example of why history is so important, and the choices leaders make can have dire consequences for us. We have to be hopeful and pray that we have peace wherever we are, because things can fall apart quickly, can't they? Now, there are some notes here that I want to read. In September 1510, Julius II launched a war against Bologna and Ferrara. Initially victorious, he was driven out of Ferrara by its Duke Alfonso d'Este in the spring of 1511 and lost Bologna as well. Okay, so Pope Julius II, he lost to Alfonso d'Este. 2. The French defeated the troops of Julius II at Ravenna on April 11, 1512. But they lost many men to the Spaniards, including their leader Gaston de Foix. And the next month, 20,000 Swiss troops came to the aid of the Pope and defeated them. The French were decisively expelled from Italy by the next year after the Battle of Novara. So the Battle of Novara. So Pope Julius II. So this was the example of the mercenaries and of the auxiliaries he mentioned. So the Catholics had an army and definitely had some warfare. It's funny because today, if you talk to a Catholic, they think militarism isn't part of their religion, when clearly the Pope understood the necessity for something soldierly. It's only modern Christianity that's pacifist, because they've been neutered by the atheists. Florence got Gascon and switched troops from their ally, the King of France, for use against Pisa in 1500s. But the troops mutinied, and the campaign was terminated. So you can't keep your troops happy and they have a mutiny, you donezo. In 1353, the Byzantine Emperor John Cantacuzene, 1291 to 1380, hired Turkish troops to fight for him against the Paleolog dynasty. I never even heard of that dynasty. thus giving the Turks their first foothold in Europe. Well, would you look at that? In 1300s, huh? Well, that's wild. 13th century. Let's put an annotation there. Borgia led an army of French, Gascon, and Swiss troops into the Romagna in the late spring of 1499 and captured Imola on November 24th and Forli on December 17th. In a second campaign there from October 1500 to June 1501, he led a larger army that included mercenaries. Gascon is a very interesting name. Machiavelli mentioned Heron at the end of chapter 6. The mercenaries he hired, he had originally been engaged in Agathocles, but they were eliminated because they threatened Heron's role. For Heron, see Polybius, the Histories 1:7-9, and then he mentions Saul and David in the Bible, which is 1 Samuel 17:38-40. Very great annotations here for us. Wild. So he's given tons and tons of examples for us that are quite interesting. I liked the one though of Heron, however you say his name. Hieron. That's pretty wild. So wild. I always like when you have you're reading something in history and there's just this wild ending that you didn't know was coming. Mashallah. Machiavelli has enlightened us again. So none of us should hire mercenaries and auxiliaries for our future armies. And don't forget, the 4 men that Machiavelli mentioned was Caesar Borgia, Heron of Syracuse, David, and Charles VIII. Mashallah, tabarakallah. The next chapter will be about what the duties of the prince are with regard to the military. Nice. Mashallah, mashallah. Hope you learned something. I'm still fundraising for my book holder and wooden panel, and if you'd like to contribute towards that, you can do so via the blog www.subscribestar.com/Milahan Archive. Hope to see you out.